Okay, so we're going to be in this video talking about chapter 10 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And just note that we skipped chapters 8 and 9. I had to skip chapters 8 and 9. And what we need to know about chapters 8 and 9 is that Justine Moritz, remember she's the nanny who's lived with the Frankensteins, she has been wrongfully accused of the murder of William, Victor's brother. She'd been wrongfully accused, convicted. She confessed for reasons I mentioned in the previous video, which I'll link up above. She confessed for reasons having to do with just being pressured by the court, but also because of religious beliefs about not being punished in the afterlife for it. And so she is executed for the crime. And this, of course, is deeply sad and is now weighing on Victor, of course. Victor is, to his name, he now has two bodies because of his creation, one being his brother. And remember, he's certain that the monster has killed his brother. And now indirectly, the monster has led to the death of Justine. So this is obviously weighing on Victor, and I would say that Victor is now, and only now, starting to think about the implications of his creation. I mentioned in a previous video that he really was only thinking about very selfish, very local concerns about not having to explain the monster to his friend Henry, but now he's really starting to think about the wider implications of his creation now that it's killed two people, which we might say at this point, too little too late, right? So in chapter 10 is another big chapter, which is a part of the reason why I had us read it. And in chapter 10, Victor is doing what he has previously done to kind of boost his spirits, and that's to spend time in nature. I mentioned in chapter 7 when he finds out that that his brother William has died, he does the same thing, which is commune with nature, spend time in nature. And you're going to see that in both of these cases, when he's out in nature, this does help turn his spirit around. And this connects very much with when we describe this novel as a romantic novel, because one of the things we said that the romantics, the romantic poets and romantic artists, one of the things that they championed was just getting back to nature. That we as humans are too connected. As part of the Industrial Revolution, we are too connected to machinery, too connected to the workplace, too connected to the factory system, and what we need to do is to get back to nature. And we see Victor doing that in chapter 7 and here in chapter 10. And as I said, in both cases, it's having a good effect on him. It's having a salutative effect on him. Here in chapter 10, he's obviously going back to nature because he's just witnessed Justine Moritz getting unlawfully killed, wrongfully accused, and then killed for the murder of William. And so he is spending time in nature, and he's having some, I think, pretty interesting thoughts. One of them occurs on page 87 in my book. He's wandering through the Swiss mountains, and Mary Shelley has some really, really beautiful just descriptions of nature here. I have no doubt, and we know from her biography that she spent time in Switzerland and had and lived there and spent time there. And so I don't doubt that these descriptions of nature are very, very true to life. And so Victor is wandering through nature, and he says on my page 87, he says, "Alas, why does man boast of sensibilities superior to those apparent in the brute? It only renders them more necessary beings. If our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire, we might be nearly free." So let me pause there for just a second. So what's he saying there? The wording's a little awkward, but here's what he's saying. Alas, why does humanity, boast of sensibilities superior to those apparent in the brute? Why do we boast of having intellectual abilities and sensibilities beyond the animals? Right? Why do we boast of this? Why do we think it's what sets us apart above the animals? Why do we think that's a good thing? Victor goes on, he says, it only renders them, humans, more necessary beings. So what does he mean by necessary beings? He means that we lack more, because of our higher sensibilities, it actually limits our free will in a way. It makes us more necessary, more, you can see, sort of confined to whatever whims pass through our minds. He says, if our impulses were confined to hunger, thirst, and desire, in other words, if we had the sensibilities that animals have, which is just hunger, thirst, desire, simpler, we might be nearly free. Animals are freer, he's saying. Why is he saying this? He's saying this because all of this higher reflection, all of his ruminating about what he did and what he should have done and what he could have done is torturing him here, right? Which is why he's in nature in the first place. He goes on, he says, but now we, humanity, are moved by every wind that blows and a chance word or scene that word might convey to us. So far from making us more free, our higher sensibilities, our ability to think and reason actually just makes us more slaves to whatever ideas pop through our heads. I can't help but think here that he is regretting the creation he had. The creation, right? When we talked in chapter 5, where when he finally, really chapters 4 and 5, when he finally brings the monster to life, we mentioned that his motivation didn't seem really more complicated than he was just really curious. He had this desire to know, and he's really curious, and so he went about doing this. And I think what he's lamenting here and regretting here is that these ideas that flitter through our minds as humans, they enslave us in a way, whereas animals don't have this. They just have their desires, and they're much freer. Victor is saying here. Immediately after that, we get a poem that Mary Shelley interjects this poem, more words that are crossing through Victor's mind here, and they just so happen to be lines from her poet husband Percy Shelley's one of his poems called Mutability. Mutability being changeable, like things being changeable, and so she gives us these lines from this poem about change, and the poem goes as such. I'll just read a little bit of it. The line is, we rest, a dream has power to poison sleep. We rise, one wandering thought pollutes the day. We feel, conceive, or reason, laugh, or weep. Embrace fond woe or cast our cares away. It is the same. For, be it joy or sorrow, the path of its departure still is free. Man's yesterday may never be like his tomorrow. Naught may endure but mutability. In other words, nothing stays the same but change, right? Change is the only constant, is another way of saying this. And so it makes sense that this line would be here as Victor is his life is being has been changed here so quickly and really beyond what he expected. And also, I think we could see this line about mutability being foreshadowing for what's about to happen, because we're going to see in a second that nature is going to have a positive effect on him here, as it did in chapter 7, and that's immediately going to change upon the entrance of, you probably guessed it, who showed up in chapter 7 when he was out wandering in nature. Same thing's going to happen here in chapter 10. So he's out wandering in nature, and he's having these good romantic thoughts. Remember, romantic with a capital R, not romance. Not erotic feelings, but romantic in the sense that he's communing with nature. And he's feeling really connected to nature. And he tells us that the icy glittering peaks of the mountains he's wandering around shone in the sunlight over the clouds. My heart, which was before sorrowful, now swelled with something like joy. So there we go. The nature is having this positive salutary effect on him. And then almost immediately, and then in the very next paragraph, what intrudes but the monster? So he says, right immediately, next paragraph, a sentence later, as I said this, I suddenly beheld the figure of a man at some distance advancing toward me with superhuman speed. He bounded over the crevices in the ice among which I had walked with caution. This thing can move across the ice in such a way that he had to be careful. This thing could just move across without effort. I was troubled. A mist came over my eyes, and I felt a faintness seize me, but I was quickly restored by the cold gale of the mountains. I perceived as the shape came nearer that it was the wretch whom I had created. Right? So it is the wretch. And you can imagine now, he's encountering this monster, and it's directly killed William, and now it's indirectly responsible for the death of Justine. So he's going to have quite a interaction with it. And here are the first things that Victor says to the monster. Remember, the first time he encounters the monster, after William's death, he sees it in the distance and it runs away. Here he's actually able to speak to the monster for the first time, and he says the following. "Devil," I exclaimed, "do you dare approach me? And do not you fear the fierce vengeance of my arm wreaked on your miserable head? Begone, vile insect, or rather stay, that I may trample you to dust. And oh, that I could, with the extinction of your miserable existence, restore those victims whom you have so diabolically murdered." So get out of my face, or no, even better, stay here so that I could destroy you, bring you back down trample you to the dust, right? And if in your maybe in your extinction, will bring back the murder victims. And the monster speaks back to him, and not only speaks back to him, but is quite eloquent, right? Quite intelligent, quite smart, and this is certainly going to be surprising to Victor. Certainly surprising to us, the reader. But we also have to remember that the monster is, for all intents and purposes, very much like a human brain, human anatomy, everything. And the monster has been on his own for essentially 2 years. Escaped, and Victor had nothing to do with him. So here's what the monster says. "I expected this reception," said the demon. "All men hate the wretched. How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my creator, detest and spurn me. You propose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? Do your due." So I'll just pause there, because there's some more good stuff that comes after this. But he's saying, you hate me, but I'm miserable. I'm miserable. So not a growl and I'm going to kill you. It's, I am miserable. How can you don't pile on hate. I'm already miserable enough, basically. Here we go. He says, you propose to kill me. How dare you sport thus with life? I don't think what he's saying there is, you threatening to kill me is you sporting with life, is treating life frivolously. I think the monster is talking about his initial creation of him. He's saying, how dare you sport with life, is you were playing around with life back in your laboratory. How dare you do that? Right. He goes on, "Do your duty toward me, and I will do mine toward you and the rest of mankind." So let's pause for a second, and you could think about this yourself. Maybe put a comment in the chat or something. I'll be looking at it. But what is, I think this raises some interesting questions here about what is Victor's duty to him? What does Victor owe him? And even more broadly, what do innovators and creators of disruptive technology like the monster, what do they owe to their to the creations? And what do they owe to the society into which they're placing this technology? And the monster is raising that here. He's saying, do your duty toward me, and I will do mine toward you and the rest of humankind. If you will comply with my conditions, I will leave them and you at peace. But if you refuse, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated full with the blood of your remaining friends. Okay. So here, on the one hand, the monster is, it's complicated. On the one hand, the monster is saying what is pretty reasonable, which is, you owe me better. You created me, then you abandoned me. Like, we can imagine a child saying that to a parent who's sort of abandoned it. You owe me better than this. You owe me more than this. On the flip side, the monster is also kind of blackmailing him, right? He's saying, if you comply, I won't kill the rest of your friends. Okay, so we shouldn't feel too bad for the monster just yet. He is ultimately blackmailing Victor here. And the way he says that, I will glut the maw of death until it be satiated with the blood of your remaining friends. I think he's indirectly admitting here that he killed William. When he says, I will glut the maw of death, with the blood of your remaining friends. In other words, how many more of your friends do you want me to kill? Right. So I think there's a tacit admission there that he's killed William, right, and also led to Justine's death. Victor wants to kill him. Obviously, he's ready to grab him. And the monster continues to make some what I think are pretty good points. And listen to the biblical parallels here. I mentioned this, I think, in 1 or 2 videos ago. We'll start to see the biblical parallels. There was the first mention of the clay in chapter 4, and now we're getting an even more explicit reference to Adam and Eve and God in the Garden of Eden. So what is it that Victor owes the monster? Well, this is what the monster thinks. He says, "Oh Frankenstein, be not equitable to every other, and trample upon me alone, to whom thy justice and even thy clemency and affection is most due. Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss, from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall be virtuous again." There's a lot in there, a lot of good stuff in there. First, he says to the monster says to Victor, "You're so kind and equitable to everybody else, and yet I'm the only one that you trample upon, when in fact you owe me the most. You owe me the most, and yet I'm the one that you trample on the most. You owe me the most, and you treat me the worst." He says, "Remember that I am thy creature. I ought to be thy Adam." Again, explicit reference to Adam and God here, right? What are the parallels? I mean, obviously, Adam is the first creation of God, and the monster is the first creation of Victor. He says, though, he feels more like the fallen angel, more like kind of a Satan figure here who's been cast out and excluded. He said, "Everywhere I see bliss, and I am excluded from it. I was benevolent and good." In other words, I mean, Satan described as a fallen angel, right? Initially an angel, fallen. So here, Our monster says, I was benevolent and good. It's only through his misery that he's become bad. I think there's a lot of really interesting psychology and just philosophical things that come up here with Mary Shelley, which is people who are bad people. Are they born that way? Are we born clean slates and then we become bad through sort of circumstance? Um, the monster here is saying I was good in the beginning. I was created good, and then became bad. Right. And we should also remember at the beginning of the Old Testament, beginning in Genesis, that when God creates everything, really, not just people, but when he creates everything, he says, and it was good. He says it's good. I mean, so the monster really here is just echoing very standard um, Christian theology, which is that creation is good. And the monster has become corrupted through his circumstance. And it's kind of, and he's basically saying, Victor, it's your fault. You made me this way, right? So fix it, basically. Make me happy again, and I'll be virtuous again. The reason I'm bad is because I'm not happy. Okay. I don't want to stay much longer. Let's wrap. So skip over. Yeah, the monster continues to make some good arguments for him. He's basically saying to him, even in your human courts, the guilty are allowed to tell their side of the story, and you're not even giving me that. You're not even giving me that courtesy, Victor. At least allow me to tell my side of the story. Basically, you're not even hearing me out. You've decided I'm this. You've decided I'm this monster, and you have not even heard my side of the story. And we end on this note, which is Victor has a change of heart here. I mean, in some ways, up to you whether you think Victor's change of heart is abrupt, whether we understand his change of heart. But he, excuse me, he certainly has a change here. I mean, he goes from really wanting to destroy this monster, can't bear to hear what it's saying, to then the following. As the monster said this, he led the way across the ice. I followed. My heart was full, and I did not answer him, but as I proceeded, I weighed the various arguments that he had used. All about stuff about becoming the way he was because of being miserable. And I, Victor, determined at least to listen to his tale. I was partly urged by curiosity, and compassion confirmed my resolution. I had hitherto supposed him to be the murderer of my brother, and I eagerly sought a confirmation or denial of this opinion. For the first time also, I felt what the duties of a creator toward his creation were, and that I ought to render him happy before I complained of his recklessness. So he has this change of heart here. What exactly brings it on? Is it, as he says here, it's just the monster's convincing arguments that he makes to him? But Victor, by the end of chapter 10, is willing to hear out the monster's side of the story. And so going forward in our next chapters, we're going to look at chapters 11 and 12. 11 and 12, and really 11 all the way up to let me double check on this. 11 all the way up to, I believe, 16. Let me see. Let me see. Yes, 11 all the way up through and including 16 are the monster side of things. And so what you're seeing is we're not changing points of view in the sense that we're not moving from first person to some other point of view. But our first person narrator is going to shift for 5 chapters. Only 2 of which we're going to read. We're going to read chapters 11 and 12. But these are going to be in the first person, but they're going to now be from the point of view of the monster. And again, with that question, as we start and look at chapter 11 in our next video, that question again of the reliability of our narrator should come up. It came up with Victor, and it's absolutely it's gonna probably be even more relevant when it comes to the monster, because our monster is, after all, human, but also not human, right? So his reliability should absolutely be something that we have as a question in the back of our minds.